Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Ask the Experts session with Litmos and Brandon Hall Group. My name is Alexa. I'm the events and webinar coordinator here at Brandon Hall Group, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's start with some introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer and Principal Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Michael Martin, Chief Learning Officer at Litmos. With over 25 years in human performance, in addition to learning, leadership, and customer experience management, Mike has made it his mission to help employees, companies, and customers be better and accomplish more than they ever thought possible. From facilitating team building programs in the woods to looking after thousands of Litmos customers as they journey through onboarding to renewal and beyond, Mike has worn many hats in this space and inspired many people along the way. Mike is an accomplished speaker, facilitator, and business leader with a master's degree in instructional design and technology. Currently, he heads up the customer experience and learning team at Litmos, covering all things from onboarding, customer enablement, customer success, a sales help desk, and a team of technical account managers. I would like to extend a thank you to Litmos for sponsoring today's webinar. Litmos develops e-learning solutions for top performing companies. As established leader in the marketing since 2007, Litmos offers the world's easiest to use LMS and comprehensive learning content library. Thousands of companies trust the solutions to create, curate, and connect learning content to employees, customers, and partners. The solutions are used by more than 30 million people in 150 countries across 35 languages. For those of you who are not familiar with Brandon Hall Group is a research and analysis firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. Visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn the designation. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you can take a survey for, it's greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com. All participants receive a piece of complimentary research once the results are analyzed. And finally, a few logistics. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the question panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. The chat is also open for today, so we will invite you to join us on today's discussion, share your thoughts as we go through, or just simply pop in and say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. And without further delay, I will pass things over to Mike so we can dive right in.
Although I know everyone wants to hear from Mike, I'm going to
pass it back to David.
No, we're going to hold you off because we're going to save you for later.
Indeed.
You don't want it to, be too much out of the gate. But I just want to welcome everybody, and I'm happy to be here with the Michaels. So for everyone's clarity, it'll be Mike Martin and Michael Rochelle. So that's how you'll know who I'm talking to. And so hopefully everyone that's on the call is pretty aware of what we're going to do here, because you were kind enough to answer a lot of questions that we asked as you registered for the webinar, which is super helpful, and it really helped us think about what we wanted to talk about and how we're going to gauge the discussion today. But I'm leaving this up here. I really want to encourage people to take advantage of the chat and the question box to ask us anything. You can pull us in a bunch of different directions. That's sort of the goal here, is to really listen and understand what people are thinking about and try to talk about those things. With that in mind, I'm going to bring up the results of the questions that we did ask. So, if you recall answering these questions, here are the results. And we asked obviously about basically the maturity levels of these various learning elements within your organization. And you can see here, it's a 4-point scale where the dark blue at the front is, hey, we're just getting started here, up to world-class, cutting edge. We've got this nailed, and pretty small percentages up at that level, which isn't too surprising to us. It's not easy to get there. That's why we do what we do. But interesting to see some of these results from technology for the extended enterprise, right? Those non-employee audiences, resellers, customers, franchisees, membership models, whatever those may be. Anytime you're having to deliver learning to people who don't directly work for you in that extended enterprise, you can see for the most parts, people are pretty middling, but it's pretty low as far as that, like say that number 4, that solid room for improvement, even compared to some of the others, only 32% there. But then when you think of the technology internally, our organizations feel quite a bit better. So I think that's an interesting point, and we're going to dig into this a little bit, but the disparity there between the fact that organizations have a technology in place that they feel as though it's helping them internally, but perhaps not helping them externally.
Hey, David, just a quick check-in. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that anyone's seeing the screen share at the moment. I know I don't, and we saw a couple of comments there. And
it was highlighted that it was doing it. So let's
yeah, it's not. Simon, thanks for Simon
check.
Harris. Thanks for because I was seeking the same thing. I'm thinking, oh, there it is. Look at that. Okay.
I checked, everything was green, but there
And
it
the
is.
chat's going to come in the Q&A functionality, I think, is what we were talking about, right? So
yeah.
Okay.
We were delivering it telepathically.
That's right.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
You're just supposed to put your forehead on the screen of your
That's right.
computer or your
Osmosis.
iPad, and then you get it.
And so the Q&A is working, the chat is working, right? We
Q&A is working. We've got we have visibility now.
Right.
We're ready to rock.
All right, because
Awesome.
I did see a note that the Q&A or that the chat may have been disabled, but I think it's on. I think we're going.
That's
Okay.
right, Simon. Thanks.
Ooh, thank you. So here, this is what I've been describing, what we're looking at here. But again, like I said, you can see the disparity here. And I thought, just going back to the when I was on there, that companies feel pretty good about their internal technology for internal audiences, but then it shrinks quite a bit for the external. So the idea that the technology that we're using internally isn't necessarily functionally working to get us externally, maybe what are some of the challenges there? Because they have definitely unique needs, but for the most part, technology should be able to manage both of those audiences. So we can dig into that a little bit. Their overall technology strategy, not too bad. It's only 20% say that they're just getting started. So companies are figuring out their technology and strategy and roadmap. The content strategy is always important, obviously, for not only for employees, but especially for leaders. We see a lot of emphasis on leadership development programs. It's really critical to organizations. They put a lot of time, energy, and money into those programs. But so that's why you see, there's companies are feel like they're still finding their way on getting that right. Like, what kind of content do we need for leaders? They have a unique set of needs. We can talk a little bit about that as well. But then just the overall learning content strategy, not too bad as far as 39% in that gray. So with looking at that, the responses from the group that's on the phone here, the one thing I'll say before I want to get your impressions, Mike, first about what's going on is that hopefully everyone that's on the call now doesn't feel as though they're alone. Because you can see sort of it's a pretty standard grouping for everyone that's on the call, but it also lines up with what we see and what we hear in our overall research, right? Beyond this, for our larger database, these are the challenges that companies continually face, and these are the things that we try to help solve. So, Mike, was there anything when you were looking through this that like stood out to you? Like for me, it was the disparity between internal and external. Anything for you that stood out that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. Really, on the internal side, is that we're conditioned to do the internal stuff first. It's been the traditional approach, right? Is that all this learning and all that stuff happens inside. And now we're starting to see a lot with our tool, like when people are coming to us, that they're realizing that they have so many more use cases than just the folks that are inside their own company. They're looking, like you said a minute ago, the partners, and they're looking at their own customers, trying to figure out how to now turn that outside and be able to really reap the rewards and benefits of that. So I thought that, that didn't surprise me that the learning technology strategy for internal employees would be probably it is the biggest one there, with the solid and good to go. Didn't surprise me that, because I feel like that's where we are as a standard. But it's interesting to start watching people start to see that they really need to be focused on externally too, that there are lots of other folks that they need to pay attention to as a cohort.
Yeah. And Michael, you talk a lot to companies about maturity levels, right? So the big picture, the overall learning maturity of the strategy in general, and then we sort of get into things. What are some of your takeaways from what people were responding here?
Well, I think there's a couple of perspectives that jump out at me. Is what would this have said in 2020 before March? That's always in the back of my mind, how this would have been answered. I think there's a pretty big percentage of people that might have answered this differently if there were no pandemic. So I think built into this is that there's people that may not feel as solid as they used to, or may see more room for improvement than they would have normally thought because of all the things that have happened over the past couple of years. It's got that standard bell curve of, 60 to 70 people are kind of in that middle of trying to figure it out, moving towards, getting better on our way. And then you've got the people that are just, getting started, which is, one end of the bell. And then you get that people that are way out in front. So it doesn't mean anything to me from a statistical standpoint, pretty standard. The key thing is how people feel about the room for improvement. And one of the reasons why we put the survey together the way we did is we wanted to drive home the message that you cannot transform learning without working on your content strategy and your tech strategy. And even the best technology delivery system is only as good as the content that's pushed through it. So the way I would read this is to say, it's great numbers, I understand it, but the message should be that there's as much work that needs to be done in deciding, do you have the best content strategy and are you delivering the best possible content and developing it and deploying it through the best possible technology, and they're not mutually exclusive of one another. And working with a provider like Litmos, where they offer both, you're way ahead of the game versus having to sort this out separately in the marketplace.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good call out there for sure. So the next thing that we wanted to do, and the whole point of this is we had taken some time and the three of us put our heads together about all the things that we are hearing, questions that we get asked, things that we talk about, things that we're asked to present about at different events. And we wanted to pull those together and have that discussion. I think we hinted at it in the registration page so that you'd seen this. So we want to walk through some of these questions. And Simon, I see your question about executives and leaders. I think it's a great question. And if we don't end up touching on it in these questions, I definitely am going to come back to it because we're going to have some more discussion at the end too. That's something that's very important to me. So I want to talk about that. So I want to let you know, we're going to get to that for sure. And as well as I think we're going to talk about this right now too, is a good segue. Simon's asking about, the acceptance of remote work thanks to COVID. And yeah, for sure, to a degree, right? It's one of those yes, but answers. So that leads us into sort of the state of everything right now, right? So 3 years into this, just what you were describing, Simon, that remote work is one, pretty significant element of what's been going on for the last 3 years, for sure. But I feel like as far back as I can look, it's one of the most complex, volatile, we're not sure what's next kind of things. Plus the idea of what could be next has completely broadened for folks because, in 2019, no one thought that the pandemic was next. So now it's like, well, anything could really happen. So given that the nature of these things, Mike, your impression, what's the state of the learning organization right now? Like, what do you hear from clients and prospects?
I'm hearing it's all about being able to adapt, right? I mean, we had to adapt so quickly to the remote virtual experience to be able to change everything and be able to continue to operate very efficiently and effectively and put the spotlight on, all right, what can people do in a remote environment and how good can they be at doing that? So what I'm seeing, like adaptation is really the key word for that one there, is that we're looking at new ways to be able to do what we used to do in person, to be able to create environments where people can collaborate. And I mean, really just putting that focus on when COVID did that to us is really key. I mean, it was to really getting back into that feel. I don't know. That's what I'm hearing. A lot of people are just like, I had to adapt fast and it had to be good. And we really had to jump full steam into the digital approach.
Yeah, it really put the idea of agility at the forefront of people's minds when they start thinking
Yeah.
about this stuff, right? The idea that what does agile really mean? And this focus of, hey, we don't need to focus on doing these very specific things really well. I mean, that's good, but we need to focus on how do we make it so we can do anything really well, right? So we have the processes and skills in place so that whatever the thing is that we need, that will change. Can we set up an environment in which we're able to adapt to those things? I think you're right. It's really changed the mindset. Michael, obviously we work with a lot of companies who, especially, mid 2020, just come like trying to figure out what to do, 3 years on, what's your take on where things are?
Well, I think the question's a statement at the same time. I mean, it really kind of says that, yeah, it is complex, it is volatile. We know why. And learning organizations are trying to figure out what to do about it. I think what's most important to tell everyone in the audience, to the Litmos customers, is that where's the stability come from right now? That's what I would want to know. If I were back being a CHRO again, I'd be like, where do I gain stability? Or that instability then leads to insight, into projection. I think everyone in the audience would say one of the things that's top of mind in state of learning right now is I can't see very far out in front of me. That's probably the single biggest change. Is pre-pandemic, I probably had, like we say in the weather, right? 5 miles of visibility. I think with everything that's happened, people are saying, sometimes it's hard to see what's going on right in front of my nose, or a foot in front of me. So I think the conditions have taken away from many learning and HR organizations the ability to look out.
Hmm.
My feeling is that, kind of sticking with the airline analogy, since the FAA has proven the fact that they can single-handedly shut down the airline industry, uh, let's stick with that analogy and say, okay, maybe right now, since we don't have a lot of visibility, we need to fly by instrument. We got to get instrument trained and fly by instrument. So we can't really see where we're going, but maybe technology can help us to get us to where we need to get to. So I would say the state right now for learning organizations, you should be heavily investing in a very robust technology ecosystem, because that's going to bring your visibility back. How is it going to do that? Through data and analytics, being able to help you be able to crunch things that may not just be visual to you right now, and being able to project out again. And the more running room a learning organization gets in understanding where the future talent needs to go based on the future of work, is really what's going to make them, I think, feel most comfortable. And really the only way to figure that out is to fly by instrument right now.
Yeah, for sure. And so that kind of environment, this rapid change, as we get a little more focused about what that means for the learning function, this dynamic that Simon brings up, this, first it was essentially all remote for a while, and then people come back, and now it's a hybrid. And the thing about that hybrid, it isn't even just one or the other, right? I've got people who are sometimes remote, sometimes in the office, sometimes on their own schedule, not even a set of days. I've got people who are remote who have decided now their best time to work is from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And that's fine. But how do we, all these things that were once under our control, or we had a better idea about, they're gone now. Even like organizations that never had to think twice about time zones because they all were here, now they have to think about temporal disparity between how people are working and what they're working. So what does that do as far as the way companies approach learning moving forward? And of course, Mike, you guys help companies through this these past few years. What is the real, big takeaway from this new hybrid environment, which, as much as people are moving back to the office, there will always now be a larger percentage of remote workers than there were before, and large enough that we have to start thinking about them as far as, the processes and tools we use. So what do you think some of the biggest impacts are?
I'm a little biased, I'll tell you, because I come from the team building and group development. That's my background. So I'm thinking about the personalities and the collaboration and bringing people together. And the way I'd answer that question, what really hit for me, because there's a lot of different ways. Of course, there's new technologies and making sure that we have all of those things in place and really focusing on reaching everybody. But I think it's what's trying to figure out how to give back what's missing now. if you think about it, right, you used to be able to go into the office and have those water cooler moments and things like Bob Iger now is saying, hey, you got to come into Disney 4 days a week. I mean, because we're a relationship species, right? We like to gather, we like to connect. How do you do that digitally? I think that's got to be on everybody's mind as we approach learning, is how do we keep that piece intact and or add it back in when it's lost, when people are more self-directed or asynchronous in their learning now? How do we make sure that we're still adding in that piece where people can be collaborative and talk and connect and see each other like this? I mean, again, like on all my meetings, I demand that they turn their cameras on, right? Like I would never go into a boardroom at an office like this and say, okay, everybody, let's talk, right? Like, you know, that's not. And so as we're trying to think about like how to create the best we can, what we had, then I'm like, hey, do this and open, you know, turn your camera on and let's do the best we can with what we have. But I think people need to realign with that and say, what's missing and how can we bring it back from what we had before?
Yeah. And I think the key to that is don't, because I've heard this sort of pushback is, well, we can't recreate that. We don't have that technology doesn't exist. We don't have it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Don't try to recreate it.
Yeah.
But do the best to replicate and make those opportunities as possible. Because they'll say,
Correct.
well, you can't do it, so I won't do it.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
too hard.
Find out what you can do and do that. Michael, you were, I think, about to join in there.
Well, you know, it's funny. The way I look at this is you got to start first with, there's a significant competition for mind share now with an employee. I think sometimes to understand what needs to happen in learning, you have to spend more time understanding the change in employee condition. So right now, hybrid work, and there's also a version of hybrid work, is sometimes I'm working and sometimes I'm not, because I'm quietly quitting in the process. So that's another version of hybrid work. We've got all different levels of employee engagement going on right now because of this environment. And there was tough sledding before the pandemic. I think we have to be very precise now. The single biggest thing I think it impacts learning going forward is you have to be laser focused and very precise about what you want people to learn, and have the learning be very potent, because you're competing for mind share. You know, people are just completely caving in on how many different things, how many balls in the air that they have to have. And suddenly, you know, you are going to introduce some learning to them. And are they in the right mind state for that? Are they ready for that? So in that situation, we have to think about situational control of the learning, make the learning as short and as potent as possible, have this be very attractive learning, but also something else too that I think we have to introduce, which is the learning has to begin to start a platform for improving learning agility. You know, too much of corporate learning or education or training, whatever we want to call it, we have a tendency to make people feel that this is the first time they've ever been exposed to this. It's the first time that they've ever had to know this, and nothing that they know now has anything to do with what I'm about to tell you. And I think what we have to do in learning through osmosis and active and passive approaches is to get people to say that mowing the lawn is not a moonshot from trimming the shrubs. Like, a lot of what you already know can help you to do your job better. And the learning we're giving you is really the net difference between what you can already apply, what you already know, and apply that with confidence. And we're just giving you like little incremental learning to tell you what the subtleties are between mowing the lawn and trimming the shrubs. And I just don't think we do enough of that. So if we think that we're going to go forward, you know, delivering learning at the size and quantity that we currently deliver it at, we're going to fail.
Yeah. Right. And so that's a good point that I think helps, because I want to bring in, because we want this to be discussion, I'm going to bring in some stuff that came in from the group. And so this Robert kind of points out, like, well, why is going back to what we had before important? Why not look at it doing it new ways? And, you know, because what we had before wasn't really effective for everyone. And that is 100% true. I don't think any of the three of us is saying, how do we get back to the way it was?
No.
I think
the components of it, right? Like some of the personal things of it, being able to see your body language or watch you smile. I mean, I know some of the hardest presentations that I give are when I can't see the audience and I can't play on the room or what they're doing or just those little subtleties that make up so much of how we communicate and meaning. And I think that's what the components of it, not go back to it, but it was just those pieces of it.
And I also think that, you know, I've never, even before the pandemic, there was always an article that would come out every few months about the death of the classroom, right? It's like, oh, everything's going to be e-learning and virtual. I've never been a proponent of that in any way. I think there's a value to having people physically together in the same place. So that there is something to get back to. But I think, well, we don't need to dedicate 90% of all of our time, money, and energy making those kinds of events. I think we should be more selective, and they should have new meaning and be done differently. Now that we have the opportunity to sort of look back and see what we were doing. So yeah, I think, Robert, we're all on the same page. I don't think there is any desire to go back to the way it was. That's one of my big takeaways. Like early in the pandemic, it was tough for me to talk about because it was an opportunity, bad time to talk about how this is an opportunity, but it's all the things that L&D teams have been trying to do, but with very slow motion. Suddenly there's this impetus. Now we have to try these things. And companies found a lot of success. So yeah, we want to move forward. So that was one part I want to touch on because it was some of the things that we were talking about. But another one that came up was when I was talking about the idea of agility, right? And I think, you know, Shava's got this point, and you may have, I wasn't necessarily talking about individuals, right? I was talking about being able to do anything well. I was talking more of like an organizational level, right? The organization needs to have, or the learning function specifically needs to have the tools and the processes in place to be able to adapt to anything and do something differently. The idea of having people be able to do that, that's also a thing, right? That's something that organizations are working on, is this talent agility, talent mobility. How can I solve new problems with the people that I have by having them be a little bit more fluid and more agile? But I don't think, you know, as to your point in what you're saying, Shava, is that, you know, some people can do some things well, some people can do other things well. And the idea of, we're never going to have a situation where you just have this blank slate of people that you can, you know, change shape at a whim. That's not what's going to happen. I think it's more about the organization being able to make those changes and use the skills that they have in their people, you know, to the best of their ability.
But we have to get people to understand that the best way to learn is from others. Like what Simon was hitting on, is we do not do enough in a corporate environment to create communities of practice, to share best practices, to be able to cut the time down between a dendrite and an axon talking to each other in your brain. The best way to get that is socialization of learning. And we have condemned socialization of learning in many aspects in corporate because we're like, oh, we can't measure it. It's frenetic. What happens if, you know, someone comes in a clown suit and posts something to explain how to, you know, start a jet engine? We can't have that. Like, we got to make sure it's been, you know, it's been cleaned up, in like a censor bureau kind of approach. You know, whether people on this call believe it or not, learning is going to happen whether you have something to do with it or not. You know, the hierarchy of your organization is such that if I need to know something, and I think my job depends on it, or whether or not I'm going to face plant in a meeting coming up, I'm going to reach out to or go out on the internet and do whatever I have to do not to have that happen. And if the corporate learning isn't available and accessible, it makes me feel like I'm not going to do that, then I'm not going to use corporate learning. So what we've got to get used to, and I hate the term user generated because it makes it sound like it's robotic. We've got to get learners to feel like they can be involved in their own learning. And that is promoting the idea that I might already have a good idea on how to do this, and I can share it with a peer or a colleague, or we can get discussion forums going, and no one's going to jump the rails in a conversation. You know, no one's going to do something crazy and start a conspiracy theory on our website. The idea is get people together. So much of learning that we think has to be built organically doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And again, technologically, a platform like you're already using, Litmos, is to just get people to congregate. You know, the religion is the learning, right? All you're doing is building the temple, the church of which people need to meet in. And that's what we really need to do. We need to just have this learning technology be the place where people can congregate, learn, and then, you know, we don't even have to create a course necessarily. We can just take good content and say, I'm going to add that as a post. You know, I'm paying attention to this discussion. And guess what? There's 3 more things I would add. That was a good video you added, that link here, you did this. Here's a couple more things to think about as a subject matter expert within the company, and add to the conversation. So we really need to start to not treat, you know, our employee base like they're batteries all the time, or they don't know anything or don't have the ability to communicate ideas. I just don't think we're spending enough time on that.
I talked about this though, where it's you talk to hiring managers and talent acquisition, and they'll tell you how we've got this process. We only get the best people, the best candidates. We go through our process. We have the smartest, most qualified candidates, and then they start working there, and suddenly everyone says, "Well, we can't let them talk to each other."
Yeah.
And we can't let people share knowledge. It's crazy. Have faith in that you've got the best people. And the good news is it's a little different than a commercial environment, right? Out there, or consumer environment, where for the most part, everyone's sort of pointed in the right direction, the same direction, trying to help each other out. And when things maybe go a little sideways and don't work, that comes to the surface pretty quick and gets rooted out because everyone else is trying to, perform, trying to get their jobs done. So it's being willing to let go a little bit and have some faith in the people that you've brought into your organization.
I got to jump in on two questions that are in there. One, so Robert, it's not a bad question to ask. It's actually very relevant, the AI question, because we got to drive humans out of the process as an intervention step to have someone continue to learn. Like, what's the one thing that you get pushback from your kids over time is stop micromanaging my life and telling me every second what I have to do differently. Well, that AI is that opportunity to just let people learn organically. So it's critical to this discussion. And the other part is stop trying to measure social learning. I mean, you don't have to measure it. The only thing you have to pay attention to is the resulting performance of people. Then you can always go back and say, however they learned it was effective. We spend too much time with learning-centric measurement. Like we have to prove the process is working. You don't. Just like when we're raising kids, the end result of how they turn out is the ultimate measure of the 18 years of effort you put in before you don't get to measure them incrementally and say, I've poured in 10,000 hours of parenting time. How are we doing? Have they learned how to get the garbage to the end of the driveway on Wednesday? Ease up a little bit on that and get with the fact that offer as much learning as you can, as many ways as you can. The ultimate measure is going to be, are people being able to do their job differently and better, or both? And do managers see that? Do leadership see that? And this micromanaging and incrementing of all of this learning to see which one is most effective, and you don't have to do that. And let me tell you something, employees today, they will not learn something if they don't think it's important and relevant. You don't have to wait to measure it. They're going to tell you, this was a root canal. I mean, I don't know what you were thinking giving that to me to learn, but it didn't help at all. In fact, if I did it that way, it's kind of like when you get involved in long division with your kids and you try to do it the way you did it, they throw you out of the room. They're like, you're screwing me all up. We're learning it differently. The point is, are they able to do the things that the organization needs them to do? And are they growing professionally and personally? That's what you got to measure. And we don't do enough of that. So anyway, I wanted to say my piece on those two things because I think they were both important points that were made.
And one piece of data that does often come out of those sort of social interactions, you start to discover where your knowledge hubs are, in the organization. Like, who knows what, who do people turn to? So you don't necessarily measure the learning, right? You're not measuring the learning, but you're measuring the activity, and you start to see, oh, this person knows an awful lot about this particular thing. We didn't know that. There's no other way for that to surface.
Exactly.
No, that's incredibly important. Just one note on that. My life before Litmos, I worked at a company where we applied open space technology, where we did this whole thing. We themed it out as a summer camp, and we did it for 4 to 6 weeks every year. And we just asked everybody, it's like, what do you want to teach that's related to the business? And what do you want to teach that's related to just stuff you love to do? And then we let everybody go ahead and sign up for those courses. They had to create lesson plans and what's immediately applicable, all of that stuff. We had a whole process behind it. But guess what happened is now everybody is teaching what they know and they're excited about. People are joining because they want to learn about that. You might have a salesperson talking about closing techniques, and one of the data folks comes over and takes it because they're like, I'm just interested in that. And now all of a sudden we're crowdsourcing and open spacing all of this and using the knowledge that's inside the company. And we've created a process by which we do that. So be thinking about that. Like, you could put a lot of consultants out of business because we always think that the learning is out there and they have to come in and teach us. And we sit here and we take it, when that's not the case. I bet you 90% of what, 95% of what you want, or almost everything, is internal. You just have to get it out of their heads, right? And get those people who are excited about teaching something, teaching the people who are excited about learning it. And we've created that, and we did that for years, and it was so incredibly successful. So yeah, on that note, that's saying my piece, Michael, about just don't think about the people that you have and what they can offer, because it's so much more exciting and valuable than you think.
Yep.
Absolutely.
We proved that over the case. I have a case study on it and all that. If anybody wants that, I can definitely send it to you. So
There was life before Litmos for you,
I know,
Mike?
isn't that crazy?
There was never
Just
life
a little
before
bit,
Litmos before
just a
me.
little
I
bit.
don't even remember that.
11
I
years of
don't.
Litmos now. So
Yeah, I
either
don't
as a
remember.
customer or yeah. So
Yeah, I don't remember before Litmos. So.
I know. Anyway.
Mike, you're talking a little bit about, what people want. So talking about giving the people what they want. We were talking about personalization a little bit. And, we've done quite a bit of research in this area around what does that mean? What does that look like? For me, it always boils down to the what's in it for me. I think it's a phrase that's come back around that doesn't have a negative connotation to it anymore. It used to feel like a very selfish thing for people to say, but the reality is whether people are saying it or not, this is what they're looking for every day. Whenever a person looks at something that they're presented with, whatever it is, subconsciously they're looking at it going, what is in it for me when I look at this? And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? It still means, why is this important? If it might be important to me for some external reason outside of me, but it's still important to me. So the idea is, how do we capture that? How do we capture that from a learning perspective that makes learning, that gives people the what's in it for me, this personalized learning? For us, we define it, that the learning aligns with people's interests, skills, and progress, and is also available at a time and a place, a medium that makes the most sense for the learner. So, Mike, you've obviously Litmos spent a ton of time with this, and we've worked together on this too. What are some of the challenges, though, that when it comes to do that? Is one thing to talk about personalization, that would be great, but what gets in the way?
A lot of things, actually. I think doing a very personalized approach, you're dealing with data and technology, making sure that you have the right data on the folks, so you know exactly what they need. Content creation and curation is a big one. Measurement and evaluation is very different depending on who it is and what the cohort or who the person is. Cost. I mean, all sorts of things get in the way of that, but get in the way of really being personalized. But you can start using technology to start to overcome some of those challenges, right? You start using the tech to be able, and the AI, as Simon and other folks were talking about, or Robert, we're talking about, to be able to start taking over some of those things that are the day-to-day grind on that, right? So, but some of that stuff is just getting it to a point where you have it, like there's a sunk cost for a lot of businesses, is what we find, to get to the point where they have everything like clean data. Have you ever heard that? I hear that all the time. Like, is the data clean, right? Can we trust it? Is that the stuff that we need to be making all of our decisions on? And most of the time it's not, right? I mean, it's a tough thing. There's a sunk cost there. And I think that's a challenge that people kind of step into, or they see it and they say, well, I may not be able to overcome that. But on the other side of that, though, if you can get to that point where you're giving people just what they need, you can answer that biggest question, that what's in it for me, but that whole why, you can say, well, like, here's the reason. And I think that's how we've been the most successful. And we do have personalized stuff, and we do give people things, and they're like, well, what am I doing? That we can give that backstory. I'm like, here's how we see it. Or they tell us, right? Say, here's what I want to do. And it's all right, great. Let's figure out how to get you where you want to be and be the most successful that you can be.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. There are lots of challenges in the way of that, though.
Yeah. And to me, it's the biggest thing. Like, so much talk about learner engagement. How do we engage the learners? Learner adoption. How do we get people to adopt the learning?
I don't know why.
And they get so focused on what's in the content, right? Like, this content has to be engaging. Well, yes, it does. But what's going to encourage someone to actually open that to see that it's engaging? Right?
Yep.
How are we engaging people before that even happens? And that's creating that what's in it for me, that, hey, here's what we want to do. Here's how this is going to help you. Here's how that's going to help us. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what we expect to happen once it's done. And, giving that whole picture. And then suddenly someone says, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And now learning starts to become, hopefully, something that isn't outside the job where I have to stop what I'm doing and do this other thing. It's, I need this thing to do my job, right? It becomes another tool.
Approach. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Like an internal motivation, right? That's what all of us learning nerds strive for, is for people to be intrinsically motivated to do anything. Because I can force you, that doesn't really work well. You could be coin operated, and I could pay you, and that works to a point, right? But if you find the value in it and say, oh, I get it, that makes sense to me, and you can create that for them and answer that why, then they're going to do it on their own, or they're going to be excited about doing it, and they're going to move forward without you having to push. And that's where, that's the holy grail, I think, for learning, is to get people to that point.
Yeah. Michael, you don't have to dwell on the challenges. You could even move on to something else, but your thoughts on personalization, because I know we've been talking about this for quite a few years now.
Yeah, I think in a world where we're trying to really promote inclusive workforces and embrace diversity, I think the personalized does not start with the delivery of the content. It begins with, have we taken into consideration the diversity of our learners before we even deliver the content? So,
Sure.
I mean, an extreme example of it, right, would be you create the perfect content and put it in the language that the learner doesn't speak that language. I mean, everything looks great on paper, except we never took into consideration that person doesn't speak that language. So they can't even read a syllable of what you just delivered to them. I use that extreme example because personalized learning is not an avatar approach to getting it right with people. Like we're going to be personalized, like we're going to get at all of these intrinsic and extrinsic factors. We also have to take into consideration who the learner is, what generation they're in, gender, race, ethnicity, orientation as they are, like everything, the conditions in which they learn in. There's a big difference learning on an oil rig, and learning at, in Mike Martin's desk. These are also part of the personalized learning experiences too. There's a lot of surrounding environmental things and the learner themselves. So the environment, who I'm actually delivering it to, and the learning that they need to learn or want to learn are not mutually exclusive on it. This isn't like some Venn diagram where we get like 10% overlap from all three circles. It's got to be 100% overlap. If you're not thinking about all three of those, then you can't create a personalized learning experience. So we've got a lot of work to do. And so when I work with companies like with learning strategies, first thing I say to them is, when was the last time you did a learning audience analysis? When was the last time you went out and really studied the conditions of the learners? Good organizational behavior, industrial psychology stuff, you know, and do that and be connected to the people that are about to get this and take all of those intrinsic and extrinsic factors and bring them back and then start building the learning. When you start doing that every single day, then you'll get a personalized learning experience.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right. So the next side we got into here was around, as all these things that we've just been talking about are unfolding or in everyone's face at the moment. What impact does that have on the content strategy? Because all these things are clearly, highly interrelated. Can't really have one without the other. So, you think about the content strategies of the past, whether it's, we just have a bunch of this off the shelf stuff, or where, we build these PowerPoints and we're good. What does this now mean, for the content strategies? Because I think it's obviously everything's much more complex. I mean, Mike, what do you tell companies to start thinking about when it comes to the content strategy?
Definitely having a really robust library of asynchronous courses that they can go and take that are available anytime, anywhere. But also my recommendation to folks is to be thinking about that blended approach a lot, or that flipped classroom, like that idea of just saying, hey, what can they do on their own? And then what do we need to do on a webinar or some sort of, the in-person or whatever it might be. So again, I'm going to go back to that the personal thing that I talked about early on in the conversation about bringing back the people side of it. I think that's really that we can't take the pendulum to swing all the way over to let's deliver everything online and have them do it asynchronously and in a bubble. I think we need to flip it back a little bit and move it to the middle, or even a little bit further to say, look, what makes a lot of sense for them to do on their own. If it's just processes and those types of things, they can absolutely learn that on their own. But then where the real learning comes is when we have cohorts that get together and talk about that, the application. What does that mean? What does that mean to us? How do we apply that? That's where I think that's the gold to me. And that's what I always recommend to folks is like, it's not just they got the checkbox and they did the course and great, but you've got to have that other piece where what's the application and what have we talked about it and have we tried it and have we gotten feedback on it? To me, that's that when we're looking at a content strategy, we can't miss that piece.
Yeah, it almost seems I'm wondering if you saw Chuck's comment in the Q&A box, because I think you're perfectly aligned in what he's talking about here is that, there's so much emphasis on learning paths and reports and course completion. And, even all these years in that I've been talking about this, it's still true that's really the main focus. And this idea that every time a subject matter expert answers a question, that's an asset, right? And it's like, yeah, that's, going back to that social and collaborative piece. If think about that, and on a daily basis, someone has a question, if they don't see the answer relatively right in front of them, in a quick, they're going to ask someone that they respect, someone that they think knows, and then they ask, they get the answer, they move on, and then that interaction just gone.
That's right. It disappears. Yeah, it's not
And it's
valuable
like,
anymore. Yeah.
right. If those things are happening within a framework, still giving them the fluidity, allowing them to do it when and where it makes the most sense. So it's open and seamless. And I don't mean track in the negative sense that we're tracking this.
Yeah.
It's like we're capturing that, right? So it can be beneficial to other people that, you know what, I had that question too. I didn't even think to ask that person. Yeah. And so you're right. That has to be part of your strategy, as you're saying, Mike. It's like all these things that happen in and outside of what we consider to be sort of those core learning elements. Those are also, core learning moments that need to be captured and everyone has access to.
Yeah, we can't expect people to know everything. It's like, I've used this before, but think about it, David, how many phone numbers in your phone do you have, and how many do you know by heart, right? Like, or you don't have any? Okay, well,
no, zero that I remember,
yeah.
And I know quite a few people who are not
It doesn't
happy
call
about
anyone.
that.
But
he doesn't call often. So you don't even know
doesn't
what
take
some
calls
review.
from anyone. Like
Yeah.
you just can't reach him by phone.
But the point is, right, you know how to access it within seconds, though. That's a different thing, right? Like, I think where we're headed in learning is to that, right? Is like, what do we absolutely need to know? And let's keep it really small, like really need to know by heart and be able to say off the top of my head. But then what do I have access to? Can I be a better searcher? Or how do I have the resources to be able, like you're saying, if that knowledge is captured somewhere and I know where that is, I can just go to that thing and I can find it, right? And there it is. And I think that's one of the big shifts that I'm seeing, and I think will change the world, like the Chat GPT stuff, right? To be able to ask it a question and it has the whole knowledge base of your company, and it's like, oh yeah, Mike, it's this, and that. And just click here, do that, do this. I'm like, that's going to put me out of work. I'm going, but I'm thinking that's great, because then I can have better conversations at a different level than just answering that stuff. To me, I don't know, it's the future.
But there's two things I would add. One is we have to make, just for a bright line as a recipe for folks out there, content has to get shorter, period. It's got to be shorter. Why? Because we're not an academic institution, unless there's some people out there which then you can take the traditional approach to a whole semester getting the point across. The proximity between learning and actually having to do something in most organizational settings now is almost zero. Close proximity. So learning is synonymous with performance support now. So you have to be able to quickly give somebody something that they can easily translate it into doing their job in a matter of minutes. So if we're designing learning for the long way around, we can't. We got to think every single day we create this, it's to help someone do their job or do their job better. And what does that need to look like? And it's got to be short, and it's got to be memorable, and they got to be able to refer back to it quickly. The other point that Mike's making, two stories. One is the reason why phone numbers work is because they did a tremendous study of how many numbers we could remember. That wasn't by accident that it's 7 numbers, 3 starting with 4, is that there was a lot of research put into that's what we can remember easily. How often do we do that with learning? How often do we say, what is the memorable part of learning? Is there a 7-digit numbers recipe for our learning so that everyone can remember something, and beyond 7 numbers, you can't remember. Try dialing internationally and everybody melts down, right? Too many numbers. Second thing is we've got to understand that people only want to know something at the very moment that they need to know it.
Yep.
So your content strategy has to be, to add to Dave's point, what's in it for me, but also just in time, just for me.
Agreed.
And I don't want to be sorting through with a giant slide bar, 4 hours of content, trying to get to 1 minute and 37 seconds on a navigation bar to go over the one thing that I want to remember or need to know right at this moment. So we've got to create that environment where people can get in quickly, get out quickly, precisely find what they need. And they don't need to start from the beginning of your learning and go all the way through to get what they need to know. They can jump in and jump out. And that's critical for moving forward.
And Google does that really well, right? Like I just noticed months ago where they started putting all the chapters in the AI would go in and put chapters in the videos. And it's like, hey, jump to this section for these key points or for this or for that. I mean, that's brilliant. I'm thinking, yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about, Michael. It's like, I don't need to watch a 5-minute video if right in the middle of it, there's 30 seconds of that it's going to answer my question in the way that I need it answered.
And And to the other point you made too, Mike, is that if I already know where it is, I don't have to keep it in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Albert Einstein, when he got interviewed, the guy asked him at the end of the interview, like how to get a hold of you. And he walked over to his phone and read the phone number to him. And he said, "Why'd you read the phone number to me? Don't you know?" He says, "Why should I keep something in my head that I can find someplace else?" So that's the other part of learning too, is creating a place where if people don't know what they need to know yet, you've
Yeah.
also given them an avenue to go find it, and they don't have to keep it in their head. And it's so easy and so intuitive. I can grab it when I need it, like Google, grab it when I need it, situational knowledge. I know where to find it. It'll always be there, and I don't even know if I need it yet.
Yeah.
So this whole thing of trying to pretend that we know everything someone's going to need to know for an entire year or 2 years is just a
That's it.
ridiculous way of doing learning.
Yeah,
Well,
training
and-
them on something and then expecting them to realize it 3 months later, like having no interaction with it, and then to retain that knowledge is just not
Yeah.
where we
I
should
mean,
be
the idea is
right
that
now.
everyone lives their regular life. There is no such thing as
Yeah.
not knowing anymore in everyone's life.
Yeah.
There is not a moment when someone could say, here's a question. The amount of time that you spend not knowing something is seconds now.
Yeah.
There's somebody asks a
Right.
question. I don't know that. The answer is literally seconds away, or the concept, or whatever it is. But yet somehow within enterprise learning, corporate learning, we've decided that you can wait 2 weeks till that class starts to know that answer. And you can't operate like that. There is no such thing as not knowing. The window for that has to be made much, much shorter.
Couple things real quick. Just
Yeah.
Simon, yes, Make It Stick is a great book. Robert,
Yeah.
the reason pilots use checklists to fly. Exactly, like the Checklist Manifesto. Wonderful book. If you haven't picked that up, just as the simplicity of it, but why it works. Brain Rules, John Medina is another good book. And just a shameless plug, as we talk about the memorization, or just talking about trying to remember and make things sticky, that's what my whole presentation is at your conference, David and Michael, as it comes up. That's what I'm going to be talking about. So that's exciting that people are excited about that. So yeah, it'll be good.
Let's talk about the technology roadmap. So moving forward, taking all this stuff into account, we talked about what it means for content in the strategy there. What does it mean for technology moving forward? Obviously, we're talking to a Litmos environment here, but what are people thinking about what should be on the radar moving forward from a technology standpoint?
I think what you said early on is a big one, is just the democratization of learning, where you can have folks be able to put in their own stuff and curate that and build out more of a crowdsourced environment where you're really connecting all the dots. Because, the traditional LMS is we put the content in, you consume it, we grade it, or it's a checkbox or whatever it might be. It has to be bigger than that. And those are the things that I think we're thinking about on that, is to create more environments like that roadmap of obviously making it easier, faster, better, stronger. All of those things are happening, but also more of an ecosystem where you can jump in and have conversations and really build out learning more than just having it be a repository like a library where you go and check a book out and then you read it and then you put it back in there. I think that's one of the challenges and one of the things we're trying to overcome.
Yeah. And when you're advising companies, Michael, you do obviously a lot of this kind of work. What do you talk about from a technology roadmap standpoint?
It's a simple question. I just say to folks, like, tell me how technology is helpful in your everyday life.
Yeah.
And art imitates life, right? I will defy anybody in the audience right now to tell me that on a large scale approach, let's all be honest, on a large scale approach, you've gone to all of your learners and said, forget about how we introduce learning technology to you. If we didn't have a scrap of learning technology, what would learning technology be to you if it was truly helpful? What would it do? How would it behave? What would it give you? We don't do that enough. So I can tell you, when you're in your outside of work, you will fire an app. You'll fire a chat box. You'll fire things within a matter of seconds because they're just plain not helpful, right? You just won't continue that technology path in your personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not shackle employees to the technology we are providing. Let's get out there and say, how is learning technology need to be helpful? And how helpful is it today? And how can we make it more helpful? And the more helpful is your technology roadmap.
Yeah, I like the idea. Like, you always think about adding technology, right? So it's thinking of it as something additive, but then thinking of it, okay, what am I being able to take away if I'm adding this? Am I reducing friction somewhere? Am I removing an obstacle somewhere? You know, and really being able to think about, you know, as you said, solving an actual problem rather than simply adding some new thing for
Exactly.
people to get through, for sure.
Right.
Economic in your choices as you move forward. So we got a couple minutes left. We've been, you know, not that we're ignoring questions, we've been answering actually all the questions as they come in, which is great, which is what I wanted to do. We still will try to get to a few more here, but I don't know, big picture, Mike, you know, big send off. Where's L&D headed?
Man, personalization. I think I go back to that, where we're starting to get better data, getting be able to connect the dots more, to be able to give people right what they need. I would like it to. It's like if I'm aspirational, more coming together, more collaborative, being able to share knowledge amongst people and create ways to do that. So it doesn't just seem like I'm the teacher, you're the student type thing. Like, we're all teachers, we're all students, and I have a lot to learn from everybody on my team. I know that. Blending of formal, informal learning, making sure that we're making it personal and exciting for everybody. And then I think the big one, though, is that I really do see AI being a big game changer down the road. I just keep banging that drum, but I was pretty blown away when seemed like the flip of a switch that Chat GPT and the AI stuff just kind of came on the scene. And then I went and played with it, and I was just amazed at what it could do. And I think for some of the foundational type of learning, where we're just teaching people, this is the way to do this, these are the steps, that kind of thing is gonna be really like that. And going back to what Michael said, just in time, to be able just to ask it that question and have it just like, yeah, here are the steps. You don't have to keep it in your brain. That opens up our brains. I think it opens up room for us to really focus in on how we can be most effective in learning, which is more feedback and more, I'm going to watch you do this, and I'm going to give you, based on my experience, what I would do different, or all of that type of coaching. I think that stuff, it kind of frees us up. Instead of just doing, beep bop compliance type stuff, I think we could get into a bigger spot. That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm seeing.
Nice. Michael, your thoughts on the near future?
I'm going to take a darker path, which is if learning and development cannot show its business impact, how it's contributing to the top and bottom line of the organization, it will be outsourced. Because right now, talent is the number one investment strategy within organizations. Upwards of 80 to 90% direct and indirect investment is in talent. Learning has to become a data-driven, evidence-based organization to show, I put this time and energy into learning, and this is where I move the needle on individual, team, and organizational performance. And that's probably the dark story. And a lot of people are probably saying, oh, that wasn't fun. I liked what Mike said about, Will Robinson following me around and teaching me things, and the robot. But that is the reality. I bet you many of us here have lived with significant budget cuts, maybe reductions in force, like things aren't going the way we want to. The only way we're going to punch out of that is to be able to sit at the table with the other business leaders and say, this is what learning did to contribute to the company's success. And we have to reform our learning strategies, do a reformation on our learning measurement approaches, everything we do, so that we can show we're a strategic asset to the organization, and that we are actually the custodians and the catalysts of 80% of the asset investment of a company. I mean, in the 80s, 80% of asset development was property, plant, and equipment. Now it's people, absolutely people. So we have a huge job as L&D professionals say, I own that. If you look at what most CLOs say, they don't even bring up learning as being in their job. You ask them, what's their number one job as a chief learning officer? They don't even say learning. They say, my job is to improve the capacity of our talent, to make them bigger, faster, stronger. It's a talent development outcome that leads to business performance. And that's what we need to do. That's where I think L&D is heading. It's a great opportunity. You shouldn't shy away from it. It's not going to be whack-a-mole. It's really just step up, get the competencies and skills to do that, and then have that strategic seat at the table and drive where your organizations need to go.
Yeah. That's right. So it wasn't as dark as you thought. I think we kind of took we saw the light at the end there. Yeah.
Brought it back.
I want to, there was one thing that actually kind of ties into that, but I feel like there's this element of all of this, and it's a very specific thing, but it ties into so many of these things. It came to my mind when we were talking about personalization. It came up when we saw Simon was talking about, that the managers don't even like have this are on the same page as their learners. They don't even know. And we've seen in our research that was one of the responses that we got in studies. One of the reasons things aren't working is managers have no idea what their people are learning. Your quote, Simon, was, "I wish my manager was hearing this kind of thing, or hearing what we're talking about." The manager, the coach, the supervisor, whatever, the role that they play in learning has been so missed. It's such a missed opportunity, because often we look at managers as a recipient, right? They're, oh, you need leadership training. But really what they are is they are a catalyst for all of these things. For the personalization, it's, well, who better knows what their team's life is on a daily basis than the manager, right? They know what their people are working on, what their schedules are. You want to talk about learning in the flow of work. They know what the flow of work is. They know how to get there. They're much closer to the daily lives of employees than an L&D professional can ever hope to be. They know what's going on. So they're there for personalization. Scale, right? So you talk about doing any of these things, personalization, others at scale. Managers are going to help you scale because they've got their teams that, they can help you work with. Alignment with the outcomes, or focusing on the outcomes of the business, getting managers on board. Hey, this is what my team needs to be successful. Here's where we're falling short. Here's what they don't have. L&D can provide those things, but you don't know they're missing. And you can do it on an individual basis, get learner feedback. But when you're getting that sort of team view of, here's what this function is supposed to do as a team, and these things aren't happening, learning can help address this. So really, if we could build that into some of that leadership development of, here's how you help your people grow as far as talent goes, as well as inserting the managers in this process of creating the learning. I think doesn't solve them outright, but helps solve a lot of the problems that we're talking about. I don't know.
They're the ultimate influencer too. They're the ultimate motivator. If they're not into it, their employees aren't going to be. I mean, I've had employees be like, I've had managers go, "Oh, I don't even want to do this. Just get it done." What message does that send to me as the learner? I'm like, well, this isn't important, so I'm not going to do it. Right. So you're right. It's a three-legged stool. If the content isn't good, the technology isn't good, and you don't have support from the manager, you have to have all three. If you don't, it's going to fall down.
But please don't assume they know how to do it.
I know we got to help, but they are so important.
That's another hour to talk about.
We'll talk about
managers
that
managers aren't like perfect coaches and mentors either. They're not like, you go to Best Buy, they're shrink wrapped and you take them off the shelf. We got to also invest in the managers to be there for employees too. But I know we got to wrap up. One thing I want to say quick before, David, that you wrap up the whole thing, is we have a part 2 to this wonderful adventure that the three of us will be back together again live at the conference in front of the Litmos booth. So you can see the brand new, I guess, aura and cool philosophy of where Litmos is going as a company in 2023. So we'll be back live. We'll be bringing back some of the similar questions. If you want to join us again and hear a different take on what we'll be covering, if you like the three of us, or you just like me,
or two of us,
that's up to you. Two of us. Two of us. Can only be two of us, right? Yeah. Please join us again, and we'll be broadcasting, I believe, Dave, what is it, on the 30th or the 31st? We'll be live at the conference. So it'll be really cool. You get to see what it's all about, be at the booth, excitement, and we'll talk more. I'm going to sign off. Thanks, Dave. Much appreciated.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Michael.
Mike. Always a pleasure. See you in a few weeks. Bye-bye.
All right.
And thanks for all the questions and feedback, everybody. It was great. And we hope you can watch us on the live event as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.